There are moments in the entertainment world when a silence is louder than any headline, any press release, any red carpet interview. And on the morning the 31st Critics' Choice Awards nominations dropped, that silence was deafening. It didn't come from the critics, or the journalists, or the entertainment analysts. It came from a place no one expected, the palace of polished branding, glossy PR, and carefully crafted reinvention surrounding the Netflix series With Love, Meghan. Because as the names of the nominees rolled across the screen, one after another, one realization hit like a sudden jolt. Meghan Markle's show was nowhere to be found. Nowhere. Not a single category. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. And that's where our story begins. Not with the glitz, not with the streaming charts, not with the hype machine that buzzed for months before the show's release. Instead, it begins with absence. With the question no one dared to ask out loud, but everyone whispered online. What does it mean when a project created to reintroduce a global figure to the world is met with an awards season wall of complete, unshakable silence? And let's be honest, for someone as closely watched, as endlessly dissected, and as fiercely debated as Meghan Markle, silence becomes a stage all its own. People don't just want to know what happened, they want to know why. Was it politics? Taste? Competition? Something behind the scenes? Or was the project simply not what critics were looking for this year? But let's step back for a moment. Imagine, just for a second, the mood in the room when the nominations were released. Imagine the team members scattered across different time zones, refreshing their feeds at the same moment, watching the categories scroll by. Documentary series, unscripted lifestyle, limited series, streaming originals, each one a potential slot, each one an opportunity. And every time, the same outcome: no nomination, no recognition, no nod of acknowledgement, nothing. If you were in that position, how would you feel? Shocked? Confused? Deflated? Or perhaps something more intense, something simmering just beneath the surface? But this story isn't simply about a snub. Award snubs happen all the time in Hollywood. What makes this moment so gripping, so worth exploring, is the context surrounding it. Because With Love, Meghan wasn't just another show. It wasn't a random documentary series thrown together on a whim or a low-budget side project meant to fill a gap in a content schedule. It was positioned, at least in the public's imagination, as a statement, a reset, a moment of redefinition for someone who has lived inside the world's spotlight for years, a chance to control a narrative that has often spun far outside her hands. So when a project with that kind of ambition fails to land even a single nomination, the silence isn't just silence. It becomes a question mark, a story, a ripple across the entertainment landscape. And that brings us to the real question driving the next hour of this deep dive. Why did the show miss out? On paper, it had all the elements awards committees love. A high-profile figure, a personal angle, strong visuals, a global platform willing to promote it, emotional storytelling, beautiful aesthetics, inspirational messaging. So how does something that appears to have all the right pieces still fall short in the eyes of critics? Is it because expectations were too high? Because the messaging didn't land? Because the storytelling felt too polished? Or maybe because audiences saw something different from what the creators intended? Was it timing? Competition? Politics? Branding fatigue? Or a combination of everything? And here's something even more compelling. The reaction wasn't just public, it was strategic. Because when a major show gets overlooked, the ripple effect impacts everything. Marketing trajectories, future contracts, negotiations, brand partnerships, upcoming projects, and even the next phase of public image management. The entertainment industry isn't gentle, and it isn't patient. When a project underperforms during awards season, Hollywood takes notes. Sometimes quietly, sometimes loudly, but always critically. Think about it. The Critics' Choice Awards may not be the Oscars, but they're still a cultural barometer. They signal trends. They spotlight rising stars. They endorse not only talent, but narratives, stories that resonate, stories that speak to the current cultural moment. A nomination is not just recognition. It's validation. It's a stamp of relevance. And the absence of that stamp, well, that becomes its own storyline. But what if the real reason behind this snub didn't start on nomination morning at all? What if the seeds were planted long before the show even premiered? Before the first trailer dropped? before the production first began? What if the quiet friction that led to this moment started behind the scenes, in rooms we'll never see, in conversations the public will never hear, between people whose names will never make headlines? Because here's the twist: big moments rarely happen overnight. They build, they accumulate, they simmer. And when they finally surface, the impact feels sudden, but the causes were gathering strength long before the world noticed. And the story of With Love, Meghan is no exception. There were early signs, test screenings, marketing shifts, quiet industry murmurs, a pattern of reactions that didn't fully align with the project's goals. And yet, because of the hype, because of the star power, because of the global attention surrounding Meghan Markle herself, none of these early signs slowed the anticipation. If anything, the anticipation grew louder. The expectations stretched higher. The spotlight intensified until the only thing left was to deliver something extraordinary. But here's a question for you. What happens when the public expects something transformative, but the show delivers something safe, or polished, or curated, or familiar? Does that disconnect affect viewership, critical reception, awards potential? And more importantly, does it shift the way people talk about the project afterward? You might think this is simply about entertainment, but it's not. This story is about the psychology of fame, the pressure of branding, the weight of expectation, the struggle between vulnerability and control, and the tension between personal narrative and public perception. And most importantly, it's about what happens when that tension finally hits a breaking point. The introduction to this hour-long story isn't just about a nomination list and a missing name. It's about the intersection of ambition and outcome, the gap between intention and perception, the delicate balancing act of showing enough to be relatable, but not so much that the control slips away. And let's not ignore something crucial. Meghan Markle is not just a celebrity. She's become a symbol of independence, of controversy, of reinvention, of scrutiny, of self-assertion. With Love, Meghan wasn't judged solely on its merits. It was judged within the larger cultural conversation that surrounds her, whether fair or unfair. That's the reality of modern fame. So when critics made their choices, were they judging the show itself, or the larger narrative around the person behind it? And does that distinction even matter? Because sometimes, the shadow of a public figure looms larger than the project they create. But here's the part that sets the stage for everything to come. This story isn't simply about the disappointment of a missed nomination. It's about what the missed nomination reveals, what it magnifies, what it exposes, and what it triggers behind the scenes. Because, as we're about to explore in the next chapter, the real drama didn't start on awards morning. It started during the creation of the show itself. And the moment you see how the foundation was built, everything that happened next begins to make sense. And trust me, what comes next will change the way you look at this entire project. Because the story behind the snub isn't just surprising. It's explosive. It was a morning like any other in the world of awards season. Or so it seemed. Outside, the sun crept over city skylines, casting long shadows over bustling streets, coffee shops filling with early risers scrolling through the latest entertainment news. Inside, however, a quieter tension simmered. In homes, offices, and hotel suites, teams gathered around laptops, tablets, and phones, all waiting for the same thing: the 31st Critics' Choice Awards nominations list. Every second felt like a drumbeat, counting down to a moment that would define months of work, ambition, and expectation. For one show, however, the anticipation carried an extra weight. With Love, Meghan, a project that had been meticulously crafted, hyped, and marketed as a defining moment, was about to learn its fate. The stakes were high. This was not just about awards. It was about recognition, validation, and relevance. To be nominated would signal that the industry not only noticed but endorsed the vision. To be snubbed, well, that could change everything. As the nominations were released, the world witnessed something subtle but unmistakable. One by one, categories appeared on screens everywhere: Best Limited Series, Best Ensemble, Best Streaming Original. Names flashed, shows were celebrated, buzz was generated. But then, it became glaringly obvious. The name everyone expected to see, With Love, Meghan, was missing. Not a whisper, not a nod, nothing. The first reaction was disbelief. Could it really be? Surely, there had been a mistake. Someone must have misread the list. A simple error, easily corrected. But as teams double-checked and refreshed the page, the reality settled like an unwelcome weight in the room. The show had been completely overlooked. Instantly, questions began to race. How did this happen? Was it a misjudgment by the panel? Did the show fail to meet certain criteria? Or, in the murky world of awards politics, was there something more strategic at play? The speculation was as relentless as it was invisible, spreading quietly across private group chats, agency emails, and whispered conversations in executive suites. For anyone who has ever been part of the entertainment industry, this scenario feels familiar. The anticipation, the hope, the careful preparation for recognition, and then the sudden, sharp reality of absence. It's a punch to the gut, the kind of moment that makes even seasoned professionals pause and reassess everything they thought they understood. But there was another layer, one less obvious to the outside world. The public may have seen an overlooked name on a screen, but behind the closed doors of the production, the reaction was something entirely different. Shock gave way to frustration. Frustration gave way to analysis. Analysis gave way to something sharper, something resembling anger. Because this wasn't just any show. This was a high-profile project with enormous investment, not only financial but emotional, cultural, and reputational. What made the snub sting even more deeply was context. In recent years, with Love, Meghan had been framed in the media as a reinvention, a bold venture that could redefine its creator's narrative. Its premiere had been accompanied by interviews, trailers, and PR campaigns carefully designed to position the show as a landmark in streaming content. Awards recognition, then, wasn't just a possibility, it was expected by many. And the absence of that recognition felt like a rejection not merely of a series, but of an idea, a vision, and a meticulously cultivated image. Meanwhile, the public reaction started to trickle in. Social media platforms, the immediate and unfiltered reflection of global opinion, buzzed with surprise, curiosity, and speculation. Fans expressed shock. Critics questioned the meritocracy of awards. Observers debated whether the omission was a reflection of quality, timing, or broader cultural dynamics. And yet, amid all this noise, one reality remained. The show had been left out, and everyone, from creators to audiences, felt it. The snub also illuminated the intricate relationship between public figures and their projects. When an award season snub occurs for a high-profile figure, it is rarely interpreted as a simple oversight. Instead, the narrative expands, wrapping the project and its creator into a single bundle of scrutiny. The lines blur between critique of art and critique of identity. This is what makes a moment like this so compelling and so volatile. People begin to question not just what the show represents, but what it says about the person behind it, about their choices, their influence, and their relevance. And in that charged atmosphere, emotions fluctuate rapidly. Early disbelief morphs into strategizing. Behind closed doors, teams begin assessing damage control, evaluating social media sentiment, considering messaging, and even debating whether the snub should be publicly addressed or quietly ignored. Every decision in that moment carries weight. Every word, every gesture, every press release has potential consequences for reputation, branding, and future projects. But amid all this chaos, one truth becomes clear. Awards season is about more than accolades. It is about signaling power, influence, and cultural resonance. A nomination is a mark of approval from the critics, yes, but it also carries symbolic weight. It tells audiences, peers, and investors that a project matters. It tells them that someone is paying attention, and when that signal is absent, the implications ripple far beyond the ceremony itself. From the outside, a snub might appear simple, even insignificant. But for those involved, the stakes are enormous. Months of effort, coordination, and ambition hang in the balance. Production decisions, marketing strategies, future projects, and personal branding can all shift based on what initially seems like a small omission. And in the case of With Love, Meghan, the gap between expectation and reality was not a minor discrepancy. It was a chasm that would reverberate through every subsequent discussion, every planning session, and every narrative surrounding the show. Yet, As dramatic as this moment was, it was only the beginning. Because the story of this snub is not confined to a single morning. The seeds of disappointment were sown long before the nominations list appeared. Behind every overlooked project is a series of choices, compromises, and calculations. Behind every snub is a backstory that explains not only what happened, but why. And in the case of With Love, Meghan, those underlying factors would soon become as fascinating and as explosive as the public reaction itself. Because the moment of the nomination reveal, as stark and shocking as it was, served not as a conclusion, but as an entry point. It set the stage for a narrative filled with ambition, tension, conflict, and revelation. It was the first domino in a chain reaction that would touch every aspect of the project, from production, to marketing, to public perception, to the very future of the creator herself. And it left a lingering, unavoidable question. What comes next after a high-profile snub? How do creators, teams, and public figures navigate the aftermath when expectation collides with reality in the most public way possible? And that, perhaps, is the most compelling part of the story. Because as shocking as the absence of a nomination may be, it is also the spark that ignites the drama, the analysis, and the narrative we are about to explore. Every decision made in the lead-up to this moment, every behind-the-scenes tension, and every strategic calculation contributes to a story far bigger than a single awards list. And it's that story, the one behind the snub, the one shaped by ambition, perception, and response, that truly captivates. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Every show has a birth story, and every birth story has a mix of ambition, tension, and dreams. But few projects in recent memory carried as much expectation as With Love, Meghan. On paper, it had all the ingredients for a landmark series, a global star at its center, a platform with unparalleled reach, and a narrative designed to connect, inspire, and entertain. But as with all ambitious endeavors, the reality behind the cameras was far more complicated than the polished trailers and promotional photos suggested. It all began with the vision. When the project was first conceived, the goal was clear: to create a series that reflected a modern, relatable perspective while leveraging the cultural and personal resonance of its lead. The team imagined a project that was intimate yet universal, playful yet poignant, a delicate blend of storytelling and personal insight. Every production meeting started with the same mantra: authenticity must shine through. But as anyone who's ever attempted to balance creativity with image knows, authenticity is a tricky thing, especially when the world's eyes are already fixed on you. Early planning sessions revealed both excitement and tension. On one side, there was the creative team, eager to experiment with format, tone, and style. They envisioned a show that would mix humor, heart, and insight, a tapestry of short stories, interviews, and lifestyle moments designed to resonate with viewers across the globe. On the other side was the necessity of brand management. With such a high-profile figure at its center, every choice had consequences. Wardrobe, dialogue, narrative arcs, even social media posts had to align not only with the show's vision, but with the broader persona carefully cultivated over years. Every detail mattered. Nothing was incidental. The production team faced the classic tension: how to deliver entertainment that felt real while maintaining control over the narrative. Every creative decision became a negotiation between freedom and oversight. Should a storyline explore vulnerability, even if it risked exposing personal challenges? Could humor be used without seeming flippant? How far could the show push boundaries before it risked alienating audiences or critics? These were questions that loomed over every meeting, every draft, every shoot. And then came the casting choices, guest appearances, and segment ideas. Each choice carried symbolic weight. Every collaborator was selected not just for skill, but for alignment with the show's ethos. The production wanted to create chemistry, spontaneity, and moments that felt unscripted, but the challenge was to make them feel unscripted while still maintaining polish. The paradox became apparent quickly. The more they tried to create spontaneity, the more it had to be curated. The more it had to feel natural, the more careful the planning had to be. Even the physical design of the sets played into this narrative balancing act. Bright, airy spaces communicated openness and approachability. Warm colors suggested friendliness and intimacy. Every prop, every camera angle, every piece of lighting equipment contributed to the illusion of effortless charm. But behind the scenes, this effort was painstaking. Weeks were spent testing angles, reviewing lighting schemes, adjusting wardrobe for subtle visual effects. To the audience, it would all look effortless. To the team, it was a carefully orchestrated ballet of detail, intention, and repetition. Yet even as the creative machinery whirred, a quieter tension began to emerge. Some team members felt that the project's dual objectives, storytelling and image management, sometimes worked at cross purposes. At times, the desire for polish overshadowed spontaneity. At others, authenticity risked clashing with the carefully constructed persona expected by stakeholders. These small conflicts, though invisible to viewers, set the stage for challenges that would resonate far beyond production. Adding to the complexity was the pressure of timing. With streaming platforms vying for attention, every release window was strategically considered. Launch dates, teaser drops, social media campaigns, all had to align. A misstep in timing could affect not only initial viewership, but the show's broader impact and, ultimately, its chances at recognition during awards season. The scheduling stakes were high, and every team member understood that even minor delays or miscommunications could ripple into major consequences. But ambition alone is never enough. Early feedback sessions, conducted quietly with select audiences, revealed both promise and concern. Viewers responded positively to the charm, style, and emotional beats of the show, but they also noted moments that felt calculated or overly polished. Critics, given early access, remarked on the balance, or imbalance, between performance and persona. And in an environment where perception matters as much as execution, these early responses were closely scrutinized, debated, and, in some cases, second-guessed. Even the marketing strategy was layered with intention. Every social media post, every trailer, every interview had to convey a specific message, approachable yet aspirational, playful yet thoughtful, personal yet universally relatable. Achieving this equilibrium was a continuous challenge. The team had to navigate public expectations, personal narratives, and cultural perception simultaneously, a feat that required constant recalibration, vigilance, and negotiation. And while all of this was unfolding, there was a subtler, more insidious factor at play: anticipation itself. The show had been hyped to the point where even minor imperfections would be magnified. Every comment on social media, every review, every mention in the press could swing perception dramatically. This is the paradox of high-profile projects. The more attention they attract, the more scrutiny they invite, and the more difficult it becomes to control narrative outcomes. Yet, despite these tensions, production pressed on. Scripts were rewritten, shoots rescheduled, and ideas revised. The team believed in the project, in its purpose, and in its potential impact. Every meeting carried the same underlying hope: that when the show finally premiered, audiences would respond with excitement. Critics would take notice, and recognition, both public and industry, would follow. But as history would later reveal, even the most meticulous planning cannot guarantee reception. Even when every element is carefully calibrated, even when vision and execution align perfectly on paper, the unpredictable variables of audience taste, critical interpretation, and timing remain. And in the case of With Love, Meghan, these variables would converge in ways no one fully anticipated, culminating in the snub that shocked so many on the morning of the nominations. And this is why this chapter of the story is so crucial. Understanding the creation of the show, the ambition, the tension, the careful orchestration, and the hidden conflicts, reveals the foundation upon which everything else rested. Without this context, the later events, the snub, the public reactions, the internal tensions, cannot be fully understood. Every choice, every compromise, every design decision contributed to the eventual outcome. But even the most well-constructed foundations can face unexpected challenges. Behind the cameras, behind the scripts, behind the curated smiles and perfect lighting, there were signals, subtle, often overlooked, that hinted at friction, at obstacles, at the possibility that despite meticulous planning, the show's trajectory might not align with expectations. And as the first episodes were filmed, as editing began, as marketing campaigns launched, those early signs began to compound. Small missteps, small mismatches between intention and perception began to accumulate. It's easy to look back now and point to singular moments, but at the time, it was a series of micro-decisions, each seemingly minor, that would collectively shape the reception of the series and, ultimately, its fate in award season. Because here's the critical point. In entertainment, creation and reception are inseparable. You can craft the most visually stunning, emotionally resonant, and meticulously marketed project, but the moment it meets the public and the critics, it takes on a life of its own. With Love, Meghan was no exception. The team believed in the vision. They executed with precision. But the world outside the production room had its own criteria, its own expectations, its own lens of judgment. And this lens would prove as unpredictable as it was influential. And as we move to the next chapter, it becomes clear, the story of With Love, Meghan is not only about the ambition and creation of a show. It is also about the subtle signals, the early warning signs, and the decisions that, in hindsight, shaped its trajectory. Because the moment of the Critics' Choice Awards snub didn't appear out of nowhere. It was the culmination of a process filled with vision, tension, and complexity. And in that process lie clues that explain not just what happened, but why it happened, and what might have been done differently. But what no one anticipated was how the production hurdles would intertwine with industry perception, timing issues, and critical reception to set the stage for a series of events that would shock the team, the audience, and the world at large. Every ambitious project faces challenges. Every production, no matter how well-financed or meticulously planned, encounters obstacles. But few series experience the combination of small setbacks and high-pressure expectations that can compound into something much larger. For With Love, Meghan, these setbacks were not minor. They were pivotal. They began quietly, almost imperceptibly, yet their impact would echo throughout the production, the marketing campaign, and ultimately, the reception of the series. The first signs appeared in the earliest phases of filming. Scheduling conflicts, which are routine in most productions, became amplified due to the high-profile nature of the cast and the constant media scrutiny. Guest appearances were rescheduled or canceled last minute. Crew rotations were disrupted. Each delay, on its own, seemed manageable, almost mundane. But when compounded, they created tension, frustration, and a sense of mounting pressure that few on set had experienced before. And it wasn't just scheduling. Technical issues began to emerge. Cameras that had been expected to capture flawless angles malfunctioned. Lighting setups, painstakingly designed to convey warmth and intimacy, required repeated adjustments. Sound engineers discovered inconsistencies that necessitated reshoots. In ordinary productions, these challenges are handled quietly and efficiently. But in a high-profile project with global attention, every delay carried the risk of becoming a public story. Every reshoot became a potential stressor, a point of friction between creative vision and practical execution. But the most significant setbacks were often invisible, creative disagreements behind the scenes. With a star like Meghan Markle at the center of the project, every decision carried symbolic weight. Wardrobe choices sparked debates over tone and branding. Script adjustments led to heated discussions about authenticity versus performance. Even simple creative choices, camera angles, background music, dialogue phrasing, could become points of contention. The pressure to balance personal expression with public expectation was constant, exhausting, and relentless. The team also faced logistical hurdles that were unexpected for a project of this scope. Filming in multiple locations introduced complexities that weren't fully anticipated. Travel schedules, permit issues, and unforeseen local restrictions created disruptions. These were the types of challenges that seasoned producers can typically navigate, yet under the lens of intense scrutiny, they became amplified. Every hiccup, every delay, carried the potential to influence deadlines, budgets, and overall momentum. Beyond the practical challenges, emotional stakes began to rise. When a production carries personal significance for its lead, the line between professional and personal investment blurs. Critiques from internal staff, suggestions for adjustments, or even logistical inconveniences can feel magnified. Small frustrations escalated, minor delays became sources of tension, and creative disagreements sometimes transformed into emotionally charged confrontations. The pressure of perfection weighed heavily on the team, particularly when the goal was not merely to produce a series, but to craft a narrative that would reflect, enhance, and protect the public image of someone constantly in the spotlight. Perhaps most impactful were the moments when external factors intersected with internal pressures. Industry expectations, media speculation, and social commentary began to influence decisions within production. Scenes were rewritten to preempt criticism. Certain creative choices were overthought, weighed against potential headlines, tweets, and commentary. The production became as much about image management as storytelling, a balancing act that slowed momentum and increased tension among the team. Even test screenings, intended as opportunities to refine the series, became sources of challenge. Early feedback highlighted strengths, charm, visual appeal, and engaging performances. But it also revealed weaknesses. Segments that felt overly curated, moments where the narrative's emotional beats didn't resonate, or instances where the authenticity intended by the creators appeared forced. Each critique prompted discussions, rewrites, and adjustments, time-consuming processes that often led to more delays. Budgetary pressures, though less visible to the public, also played a role. High-profile productions require substantial investment in sets, crew, technology, and talent. Delays and reshoots, even minor ones, quickly accumulate additional costs. The team faced a constant balancing act: deliver the highest quality possible while staying within the allocated budget. Each setback, therefore, carried financial implications, adding yet another layer of stress to an already high-pressure environment. And while most productions deal with setbacks, the combination of visibility, expectations, and personal stakes made these challenges unique. The usual strategies for mitigation, flexible scheduling, contingency planning, minor adjustments, were complicated by the intense scrutiny surrounding the project. Every decision was magnified, every adjustment noticed, every delay felt consequential. The team had to operate with precision under a microscope, knowing that even small missteps could affect not just the production, but the public perception of the show's lead. Despite these hurdles, production continued, driven by ambition, professionalism, and the belief in the project's potential. The team remained committed to creating a series that would resonate, inspire, and entertain. Yet, even with that commitment, the setbacks introduced an undercurrent of tension that would become increasingly influential. Each challenge, whether technical, logistical, or emotional, shaped the series in ways that would later become apparent in critical reviews, audience reactions, and ultimately, award considerations. These setbacks also had ripple effects on the broader team dynamic. Relationships between directors, producers, creative leads, and talent became strained. Communication missteps and misunderstandings were magnified. Decisions that would normally be routine became contentious. Trust was tested, patience was exhausted, and morale fluctuated in response to setbacks, both minor and major. These human factors, often invisible to the audience, played a crucial role in shaping the final product and the way it was received. And yet, even as obstacles mounted, the production pressed on with determination. Each challenge was met with problem-solving, creativity, and resilience. The team adapted to scheduling conflicts, technical difficulties, and creative disagreements, constantly recalibrating to stay on course. It was a process of compromise, negotiation, and relentless effort, reflecting the high stakes of creating content in a hyper-visible environment. But there was one truth that could not be avoided. Setbacks, no matter how well managed, leave traces. They influence decisions, affect pacing, and can subtly shift the tone of a project. And in the case of With Love, Meghan, these early setbacks would accumulate, influencing how the series was ultimately perceived by critics, audiences, and awards committees alike. The challenges experienced during production were not just obstacles. They were part of the story itself, shaping the outcome in ways that would become clear only later. And just when the team thought they had navigated the worst of the setbacks, another challenge emerged. One that no one had expected: and one that would have a profound impact on the trajectory of the show. It came not from technical difficulties, not from schedules, not from internal disagreements, but from the very audience the team hoped to captivate. The early reactions, subtle and preliminary, hinted at a divergence between the creator's intentions and the viewer's perceptions, a divergence that would play a critical role in shaping both the critical reception and the eventual award snub. But what happened next would push the production into uncharted territory, revealing tensions, pressures, and consequences that no one had fully anticipated, and setting the stage for the chain of events that would lead to the shocking snub of the Critics' Choice Awards. While the production team wrestled with scheduling conflicts, creative disagreements, and technical setbacks, another, quieter force was already at work: the critics. Unlike audiences, whose reactions are immediate and visible on social media, critics engage with projects in private. They watch, they analyze, they compare. They take notes, draft thoughts, and deliberate. Their opinions often remain unseen until publication, but they carry enormous influence. And in the case of With Love, Meghan, their early reactions would become a critical piece of the puzzle. Even before the series officially premiered, select critics received advanced screenings. These sessions were designed to provide feedback, build anticipation, and give industry insiders an early sense of the show's tone, content, and impact. But as the critics settled into their chairs, notebooks open and laptops ready, they brought more than professional objectivity. They brought personal expectations, biases, and a contextual lens shaped by Meghan Markle's public persona. The first impression, according to insiders, was striking. Critics acknowledged the production values. Crisp visuals, well-designed sets, stylish wardrobe choices, and meticulous lighting. They noted the charm of the performances, the playful interactions, and the moments of emotional reflection. On the surface, everything looked polished, professional, and compelling. Yet, beneath the surface, subtle concerns began to emerge. One recurring theme in early notes was authenticity. Critics remarked that while the show aimed to feel spontaneous and relatable, certain segments appeared over-curated, almost staged. Moments intended to convey intimacy occasionally felt rehearsed. Humor, while present, sometimes landed with a deliberate punch rather than natural timing. Dialogue, designed to seem off the cuff, occasionally felt scripted. In short, the tension between polished presentation and raw authenticity was palpable. Even to those watching in controlled settings, away from the cameras and public scrutiny, critics also paid attention to narrative cohesion. With multiple storylines, lifestyle segments, interviews, and personal reflections interwoven into a single series, the pacing required careful management. Some reviewers noted that the tonal shifts could be jarring. A lighthearted, playful moment might be followed immediately by a reflective, emotional one, leaving a sense of discontinuity. While this could have been intentional, a stylistic choice to mirror the complexities of real life, critics often questioned whether the transitions were smooth enough to maintain immersion. Then there was the question of relatability. A project centered on a globally recognized figure brings inherent challenges. Critics asked themselves, who is this show for? Is it designed for fans, casual viewers, industry professionals, or cultural observers? The ambiguity raised questions about the intended audience and the show's ability to connect with them fully. Even subtle choices, props, dialogue, camera angles, were scrutinized for their contribution to audience engagement. Interestingly, some critics responded positively to the show's ambition. They recognized the difficulty of balancing personal narrative with public persona, of mixing entertainment with aspirational messaging. They praised certain segments for creativity, authenticity, and charm, highlighting moments that could resonate beyond the immediate viewership. But alongside the praise, there was a clear undercurrent of critique, a sense that while the production excelled in execution, it occasionally faltered in emotional resonance, in narrative cohesion, and in delivering the kind of impact that tends to attract award recognition. What's particularly notable is that critics rarely shared these concerns publicly at this stage. Their observations remained private, subtle, and nuanced. These early notes were intended to inform feedback, discussion, and possibly adjustments prior to the series' wider release. Yet, even without public dissemination, these early assessments carried weight. They shaped internal discussions among media professionals, influenced early social media commentary once the show aired, and contributed indirectly to the evolving perception of the series in the industry. The critics' focus on authenticity versus curation is especially significant when we consider the broader cultural context. Meghan Markle is not simply a public figure. She is a symbol within global media conversations, representing narratives of identity, independence, and reinvention. When a show starring her is presented, it is interpreted not only as a creative product, but also as an extension of her personal brand. Critics are aware of this dynamic, and their early evaluations often take these factors into account, whether consciously or subconsciously. The question becomes, does the show achieve its artistic goals while simultaneously managing the weight of public expectation? Early reactions also highlighted a tension between ambition and execution. While the show attempted to blend entertainment, personal narrative, lifestyle content, and aspirational messaging, some critics felt the balance leaned too heavily toward image management. Segments that might have felt raw or candid were occasionally overshadowed by production polish. Emotional beats that could have carried vulnerability were sometimes undercut by stylized presentation. These critiques, while subtle, signaled a potential gap between intention and perception, a gap that would later influence award considerations. Beyond these qualitative observations, critics were also aware of timing and context. The awards landscape is highly competitive, and recognition often depends on both artistic merit and cultural resonance. Shows that align with current trends, tap into public sentiment, or demonstrate innovation tend to perform well. Critics' early notes suggested that while with Love, Meghan excelled in technical execution, there were questions about whether it captured the cultural moment sufficiently to stand out amidst strong competition. It's also worth noting that critics' reactions often intersect with audience perception. While test screenings and early reviews are distinct from mass public opinion, they shape narratives that eventually reach broader audiences. Social media chatter, industry reports, and early commentary threads are influenced by these initial evaluations, creating a feedback loop between critical reception and public perception. In other words, the critics' private reactions are far from inconsequential. They quietly set the stage for how the series would be received at large, even before awards nominations came into play. Despite these nuances, it's important to emphasize that the early critical response was not entirely negative. Many acknowledged the charm, visual appeal, and ambitious scope of the project. They recognized the difficulty of creating content that is simultaneously personal, entertaining, and aspirational. But the subtle critiques about authenticity, cohesion, and cultural resonance hinted at challenges that could, and eventually would, impact the show's trajectory. And therein lies the key. The critics' early reactions, though not immediately visible to the public, planted seeds. They shaped perceptions, influenced industry discussions, and created subtle ripples that would eventually surface in award season. For a high-profile project like with Love, Meghan, these private notes mattered immensely. They were the first signals that despite polished production, charm, and ambition, there were areas where the show might not fully meet critical expectations. Yet, at the time, these nuances were still largely invisible to the public. Audiences awaited the premiere, unaware of the critical lens already being applied behind closed doors. The team, meanwhile, continued to refine, adjust, and promote the series, hopeful that positive reception would outweigh subtle critiques. But as the nomination day approached, the quiet evaluations by critics began to take on an outsized significance, influencing how industry insiders, decision-makers, and eventually awards panels would perceive the project. And just when it seemed the critics' influence was an abstract, behind-the-scenes factor, the first signs of its practical impact began to emerge. Early reviews trickled into public channels. Bloggers and entertainment journalists began echoing points originally noted in private screenings. Social media discussions began reflecting the subtleties of critique, moments of charm paired with questions about authenticity, technical excellence paired with narrative unevenness. These ripples, initially quiet, grew steadily, shaping the broader conversation around the show. In this context, it's easy to see why the production team was on edge. They had crafted a series intended to be both highly polished and deeply relatable, yet the early critical feedback suggested a tension that could not be fully resolved. Even with meticulous attention to detail, even with careful marketing and image management, some elements, timing, perception, and narrative resonance, remained outside the team's control. And as the Critics' Choice Awards nominations approached, this quiet, behind-the-scenes layer of critique would become increasingly consequential. The decisions made by critics in private screenings, the subtle assessments of narrative cohesion and authenticity, and the awareness of cultural resonance all converged to influence which projects were recognized and which were overlooked. But just as the production team believed they could anticipate every factor influencing awards outcomes, the next set of challenges emerged. Audience reception, social media dynamics, and real-time public commentary added an unpredictable layer. The critics' early reactions were only the beginning. What would follow, public perception, media narratives, and industry politics, would collide with production realities in ways no one had fully anticipated. And that, ultimately, set the stage for the most critical question of all. Could With Love, Meghan survive the convergence of production setbacks, subtle critical scrutiny, and the relentless expectations of a global audience? Or was the show destined to face an outcome far more shocking than anyone imagined? But what came next would push this story into the public eye. And what happened then would begin to reveal why the Critics' Choice snub was not just an accident, but the result of a perfect storm no one saw coming. When With Love, Meghan finally premiered, it was met with an immediate wave of attention that only a project of this profile could generate. Social media buzz ignited almost instantly. Headlines appeared across entertainment outlets. Viewers logged in, tuned in, and began forming opinions within minutes. But unlike critical reviews, which tend to be measured, analytical, and somewhat filtered, audience reaction was raw, unrestrained, and unpredictable. And it was this very unpredictability that would play a pivotal role in shaping the show's trajectory. From the outset, the response was mixed. Some viewers were enthralled by the charm, energy, and visual polish of the series. They praised the production values, noting that the sets, wardrobe, and lighting all contributed to a sleek, aesthetically appealing experience. They highlighted moments of humor, warmth, and candid reflection, and for many, these segments resonated on a personal level. Fans shared clips, quoted lines, and engaged enthusiastically with the social media campaigns surrounding the premiere. Yet alongside these positive reactions, criticism emerged quickly and loudly. Some viewers felt that the show, despite its polish, lacked depth or authenticity. Moments intended to feel spontaneous or intimate were perceived as rehearsed. Dialogue that aimed for relatability occasionally came across as scripted. Even small details, gestures, expressions, or transitions were scrutinized under the lens of audience expectations. In short, the very elements designed to enhance the show sometimes became points of critique. What made this reception particularly compelling was its intensity. Audiences were not merely providing casual feedback. They were emotionally engaged, passionate, and often polarized. Supporters defended the series vigorously, emphasizing the challenges of producing content in the public eye and celebrating moments they found charming, relatable, or inspiring. Detractors, conversely, were vocal in their dissatisfaction, highlighting perceived flaws, questioning authenticity, and drawing comparisons to other high-profile series. Social media became a battleground of perspectives, a live forum where every opinion, positive or negative, was amplified. One striking aspect of this polarized reception was its global reach. With a lead as internationally recognized as Meghan Markle, viewers from diverse cultural backgrounds engaged simultaneously. Different demographics interpreted the show in distinct ways. What resonated in one region might be criticized in another. Humor, sentimentality, pacing, and cultural references were all perceived differently depending on context. This multiplicity of interpretations amplified the intensity of reaction, creating a complex web of approval and critique that defied simple categorization. At the same time, the polarized response highlighted a paradox inherent in high-profile projects. Ambition draws attention, but attention magnifies critique. The more a series is promoted, the more viewers anticipate, and the more they evaluate. For with Love, Meghan, every frame, every moment, every gesture was observed not just as content, but as an extension of the lead's persona. Audience reception, therefore, was inseparable from broader discussions about identity, influence, and cultural significance. The show became more than entertainment. It became a lens through which viewers assessed the creator herself. The social media landscape reflected this dynamic vividly. Hashtags surged. Tweets went viral. Memes circulated. Humor and critique intertwined. Fan communities rallied in defense, sharing favorite moments, praising production choices, and analyzing intent. Critics of the series responded with equally creative commentary, dissecting episodes, highlighting perceived inconsistencies, and debating whether the show succeeded in its goals. These conversations were immediate, public, and often unforgiving. In a digital age, audience reception is not merely observed. It is performed, debated, and amplified in real time. Interestingly, the polarized reception also influenced industry perception. Executives, producers, and award committees monitor not only critical reviews, but also public engagement metrics. Streaming numbers, social media sentiment, and audience retention rates become part of the conversation. In the case of With Love, Meghan, the intensity of reactions, both positive and negative, was impossible to ignore. While high engagement can be advantageous, it can also signal unpredictability, fragmentation of audience perception, or misalignment between intent and reception. All factors that could influence award considerations. Moreover, the polarized reception created internal tension within the production team. While some celebrated the passionate engagement as evidence of the show's cultural relevance, others feared that criticism, however constructive, might undermine the broader campaign. Decisions about future marketing, social media strategy, and messaging became more complicated. Should critiques be addressed publicly? Should defenders amplify positive responses? Should certain negative interpretations be countered or ignored? Every choice carried strategic implications for both the project and the public persona of the lead. Beyond strategic concerns, audience reception carried an emotional weight. For anyone intimately involved in creating the series, hearing criticism, even when valid, can be jarring, disheartening, or even personally confronting. The dual pressures of public scrutiny and creative ambition created an environment where emotional stakes were high. Supportive feedback offered validation, yet criticism amplified self-reflection, uncertainty, and in some cases, defensiveness. The experience was intense, immersive, and unrelenting. A reminder that producing content at this scale involves more than logistics and creativity. It involves navigating human emotion under scrutiny. Yet, despite the polarized reception, one thing was clear. The show had succeeded in capturing attention. Engagement metrics soared. Social media conversation volumes reached record levels. People were talking, debating, analyzing, and sharing. In one sense, the series had achieved a form of success. But here lies the paradox. Attention alone does not equate to acclaim. The intensity of public discussion can both elevate a project and expose its vulnerabilities. And in the context of awards season, the divergence between public engagement and critical recognition would become increasingly significant. The reception also raised questions about expectations versus reality. Audiences often project ideals, assumptions, and desires onto high-profile projects. When reality does not align with these expectations, reactions can be sharp and emotional. For With Love, Meghan, the combination of anticipation, celebrity focus, and media buildup created a particularly high bar. Every perceived shortfall was magnified, every success was celebrated, and every deviation from expectation became a talking point. This dynamic amplified polarization, intensified scrutiny, and shaped ongoing narratives about the show's impact. In addition, the polarized reception underscored the unpredictability of audience behavior. Shows that are meticulously crafted, technically flawless, and strategically marketed can still provoke unexpected reactions. Viewer interpretation is influenced by cultural context, prior expectations, personal biases, and broader media narratives. In this case, the series' reception illustrated how even the most ambitious and polished projects must navigate the complexity of perception, a complexity that is often beyond the control of production teams or marketing experts. And yet, as intense as audience reaction was, it only added fuel to the broader narrative surrounding the show. Media coverage highlighted extremes, social media amplified conflict, and online discussion threads became echo chambers where both praise and critique were magnified. This heightened attention contributed to a perception of the series as controversial, compelling, and culturally significant, but it also positioned it in a space where awards committees might evaluate it more critically. The polarized reaction, in other words, was both a triumph and a complication. Finally, this chapter in the story reveals a critical insight about modern entertainment. Audience engagement is multidimensional, unpredictable, and deeply intertwined with both perception and cultural context. For with Love, Meghan, polarized reception highlighted the delicate balance between achieving attention and achieving acclaim. The intensity of reaction demonstrated that success in one domain, viewership and discussion, does not guarantee success in another, critical recognition and awards. And it set the stage for the next chapter, where timing, industry politics, and strategic decisions would converge to shape the ultimate outcome of the series in the eyes of critics and awards committees. But what came next, the collision of timing, expectation, and industry dynamics, would prove to be the factor that tipped the scales in ways no one could have fully predicted. When it comes to awards recognition, talent and production quality are only part of the equation. Timing, competition, and the intricate dynamics of industry perception often play an equally decisive role. For with Love, Meghan, the Critics' Choice Awards snub cannot be understood solely through the lens of production setbacks, audience reaction, or critical feedback. Instead, it is essential to examine the broader landscape of timing, scheduling, and competitive positioning that surrounds every awards season. Awards seasons operate like a high-stakes chess game. Each series, film, or project is positioned strategically to maximize visibility, capitalize on momentum, and align with cultural conversations. Decisions about release dates, promotional campaigns, and media exposure are not random. They are calculated to ensure the project is top of mind when voters make their selections. In the case of With Love, Meghan, the timing of the release intersected with a particularly crowded and competitive season, creating both opportunities and challenges. Consider the timing of the premiere. The series debuted amidst a wave of high-profile releases, many of which featured innovative storytelling, star-studded casts, or culturally resonant themes. In a season packed with formidable contenders, every project competes not just for viewers, but for critical attention and industry recognition. Even minor differences in timing, whether a few weeks earlier or later, can influence how projects are perceived, discussed, and ultimately considered for awards. A crowded field amplifies scrutiny and can dilute the impact of even a polished, high-quality production. Competition is another crucial factor. Awards committees do not evaluate projects in isolation. They compare, contrast, and weigh them against other contenders. For With Love, Meghan, the competition included established series with strong critical acclaim, emerging talent generating buzz, and high-profile productions that aligned with prevailing cultural conversations. Even if a series excels in production quality and audience engagement, it may be overshadowed by projects that align more closely with the zeitgeist or that offer narratives critics and voters deem more compelling or innovative. Timing, in this sense, becomes inseparable from context. The dynamics of awards consideration are also influenced by perception and momentum. Voters often respond to the cumulative narrative surrounding a project, how it is discussed in the media, how audiences react, and how industry insiders position it. Projects that arrive early in the season risk being forgotten by the time voting occurs. Those released too late may not have time to build awareness and critical traction. With Love, Meghan found itself navigating this delicate timing landscape, where even minor misalignments could affect visibility and perceived relevance. Promotional strategy plays a pivotal role as well. Awards campaigns are meticulously designed to highlight a project's strengths, showcase standout moments, and ensure that key decision-makers engage with the material. For With Love, Meghan, the marketing campaign had to achieve a dual goal: attract viewers while signaling to industry insiders that the series was worthy of consideration. Yet, despite high-profile interviews, media appearances, and social media engagement, the campaign faced challenges. In a crowded awards season, competing voices, competing narratives, and competing projects vie for attention, creating an environment where even strategic efforts can be diluted. Additionally, cultural context and thematic alignment matter. Awards committees are sensitive to trends, societal conversations, and cultural relevance. Projects that tap into pressing social issues, innovative storytelling methods, or resonant themes often gain an advantage. While with Love, Meghan had elements of personal insight, aspirational messaging, and creative production, some observers suggest that it may not have aligned as closely with prevailing critical priorities. Its polish and charm, while appealing to audiences, may have been perceived by some as safer or less daring compared to other submissions competing for recognition. Internal industry politics can also subtly influence outcomes. Awards committees consist of individuals with preferences, biases, and professional networks. While the process is intended to be objective, human judgment is inherently shaped by familiarity, perception, and comparative evaluation. Projects with robust industry relationships, sustained visibility, or prior recognition may enjoy implicit advantages. In this landscape, timing and competition are not merely logistical considerations. They interact with perception and influence, subtly shaping which projects rise to the top and which are overlooked. Another factor lies in the cumulative effect of previous reception. Critical responses, early audience engagement, and media narratives can either build momentum or create obstacles for awards recognition.